This is my prime example of people that's puppet masters trying to control the narrative.
We are awaiting Mayor Henyard to arrive.
Tiffany Henyard, the embattled mayor of Dalton, Illinois, and head of Thornton Township, finds herself at the heart of a crisis that threatens to dismantle her career and disrupt local governance. Once hailed as a promising figure in Illinois politics, Henyard's rise has been overshadowed by a series of scandals that have rocked both her mayoral administration and township leadership. What began as a hopeful vision for progress has devolved into an unfolding disaster, with explosive allegations of corruption, financial mismanagement, and the troubling accumulation of unchecked power. Henyard's actions, both in the mayor's office and as the township supervisor, have sparked a political firestorm, drawing intense scrutiny from constituents, political rivals, and other officials. The trust that once seemed solid between Henyard and her community has eroded rapidly, as a series of troubling revelations suggest a consistent pattern of ethical violations and abuses of power. These developments have shaken the very foundation of local governance, leaving residents questioning the leadership they once supported and casting doubt on Henyard's ability to restore order. What had once been a promising political ascent now risks ending in scandal and disarray, with the future of her career hanging in the balance. Tiffany Henyard's rise in Illinois politics was once seen as a beacon of hope, a promise of change and progress for Dalton, Illinois, and Thornton Township. Henyard, a member of the Democratic Party, was viewed as a dynamic leader, an individual who could propel the small town into a new era of growth, innovation, and community spirit. Her tenure, initially filled with optimism and anticipation, has instead descended into a scandal of biblical proportions, eroding both her political career and the very fabric of local governance. What began as a hopeful political ascent has now morphed into a political thriller, laden with corruption allegations, ethical missteps, and an increasingly authoritarian approach to leadership. Henyard's downfall is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked political power. Dalton, a tight-knit community that initially supported her vision for progress, now finds itself in a state of turmoil. Once hailed as a progressive leader, Henyard has become the embodiment of dysfunction, division, and mistrust. Allegations of financial mismanagement, corruption, and the abuse of power have dominated headlines, overshadowing the promise that once surrounded her leadership. What was meant to be a story of hope and renewal has instead become a nightmare for those who believed in her. At the start of her political journey, Henyard was hailed as a new force within local politics, someone with fresh ideas and the ambition to make a real difference. The residents of Dalton, a small town in Illinois, saw in her an opportunity to transform their community. Henyard's message resonated with those who were desperate for change after years of stagnant leadership. Her candidacy was embraced by a broad coalition of voters who saw her as a progressive champion, someone who would challenge the status quo, clean up local government, and make decisions based on the best interests of the people. For a time, Henyard's ascent seemed like the dawn of a new era for Dalton. However, that promising future soon unraveled. The first cracks in Henyard's leadership began to appear when questions were raised about her handling of the town's finances. What had initially been a promising and energetic push for change started to look more like a series of hasty decisions that lacked the oversight and transparency residents had hoped for. Allegations surfaced regarding Henyard's management of public funds, suggesting a pattern of financial missteps and improper allocation of resources. What had been presented as a vision for community development and improvement quickly began to show signs of poor planning, wastefulness, and mismanagement. But it wasn't just financial mismanagement that led to Henyard's downfall. Over time, her leadership style evolved from one of progressive optimism to something far more toxic and divisive. What had been seen as bold, innovative leadership turned into a troubling trend of authoritarian behavior. Henyard's willingness to sideline political opponents and punish those who disagreed with her created a climate of fear and distrust in the local government. Instead of fostering collaboration and constructive debate, Henyard's approach to governance alienated allies, crushed dissent, and created a political environment where anyone who challenged her was subjected to political retribution. One of the most glaring examples of this authoritarian streak came when Henyard imposed over $2,000 in fines on the Dalton Park District for what many saw as minor infractions. Simple tasks like spreading mulch and installing playground equipment. These actions, designed to maintain the town's recreational spaces, were suddenly met with punitive fines, which many residents felt were retaliatory. The fines were widely viewed as an attempt to punish the park district for its independence and for standing up to Henyard's increasingly domineering leadership. The situation escalated further when Henyard allegedly blocked more than $500,000 in grants intended for the improvement of local parks. These funds could have been used to improve the town's recreational areas, making them safer and more inviting for families and children. Instead, they were withheld, leaving many to wonder whether Henyard was more focused on punishing those who defied her than on advancing the interests of Dalton's residents. As the controversy surrounding the park district continued to grow, Henyard's leadership became more entrenched in scandal. She was accused of using her political power to suppress dissent, retaliate against those who criticized her, and maintain control over the town's decision-making process. At every turn, Henyard's actions seemed more focused on securing her own power and silencing those who challenged her than on serving the needs of the community. This growing disregard for transparency and accountability only fueled the mounting dissatisfaction with her leadership. As the pressure continued to mount, Henyard's grip on power began to weaken. The tipping point came when she was removed from the Democratic ballot for the position of Thornton Township Supervisor. This stunning move signified the political fallout from her controversial actions, and many saw it as a direct response to the growing allegations against her. The very political party that had once embraced Henyard as a rising star had now turned its back on her, signaling the end of her political influence. The decision to remove her from the ballot wasn't just a procedural move. It was a decisive step that illustrated how Henyard's political career had spiraled into irrelevance. The same party that had once championed her vision now saw her as a liability. In the wake of this removal, Henyard's reaction was one of defiance. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions or attempting to rebuild the trust she had lost, Henyard chose to portray herself as a victim of a political conspiracy. She spoke out in public, accusing her detractors of targeting her for political gain. But rather than garnering sympathy, her defiance alienated her further from the community. Instead of addressing the very real concerns that had led to her downfall, Henyard dug in her heels, refusing to acknowledge her failures or the damage she had caused. Henyard's leadership had once promised a brighter future for Dalton, but now her legacy is defined by political retribution, failed governance, and an increasingly toxic environment. Her authoritarian tactics, which once seemed like bold moves to assert control, have instead created an atmosphere of fear, distrust, and division. Public officials who once worked alongside her are now focused on political survival rather than effective governance. Critical projects and improvements, such as long-awaited upgrades to local parks, have been delayed, and the town's future looks uncertain. Henyard's legacy is one of lost potential, squandered opportunities, and a failure to live up to the promises she made. Her administration, once seen as the dawn of a new political era, is now a symbol of corruption, mismanagement, and the dangers of unchecked political power. As Dalton struggles to rebuild in the aftermath of her leadership, it remains to be seen if the town can recover from the deep scars left by Henyard's controversial tenure. The lessons learned from her rise and fall will likely reverberate for years to come, serving as a stark reminder of the dangers of political overreach and the importance of accountability in leadership. In a final attempt to reassert control, Henyard recently declared, "That's just me telling you a little bit, because all this finger-pointing at Tiffany or lying on me, I'm over it now. It's time for me to speak." While these words were intended to portray her as a strong, unapologetic leader, they only revealed her unwillingness to confront the reality of her failed administration. Henyard's deflection of blame and refusal to acknowledge her role in the unraveling of Dalton's political landscape serve as a testament to her inability to take responsibility for the damage she caused. As the town of Dalton moves forward, it will have to grapple with the fallout from Henyard's reign. Once regarded as a symbol of hope and renewal, Henyard is now seen as a cautionary tale of how power can corrupt even the most promising leaders. The challenges facing Dalton in the wake of her departure will be immense, but perhaps the town's greatest hurdle will be recovering from the divisions and mistrust that Henyard's leadership left in its wake. Tiffany Henyard, once a rising star in Illinois politics, now finds herself at the center of a scandal that has engulfed her leadership roles as mayor of Dalton and supervisor of Thornton Township. What began as a promising political career has spiraled into a series of controversies and scandals, leaving both communities in turmoil and shaking the foundation of local governance. Henyard's rise to power had been seen by many as a beacon of hope for Dalton, a small town in Illinois, which saw her as a progressive force capable of driving positive change. However, her tenure has since been marred by allegations of corruption, financial mismanagement, and a growing reputation for vindictiveness that has eroded public trust. Henyard's leadership style, once hailed as bold and innovative, has increasingly been described as authoritarian and divisive. She became known for using her political influence to punish those who dared to challenge her authority, including local government agencies, independent agencies, and political opponents. One of the most notable examples of Henyard's overreach was her treatment of the Dalton Park District. Henyard imposed more than $2,000 in fines on the Park District for trivial maintenance tasks, such as spreading mulch and installing playground equipment, fundamental responsibilities necessary for maintaining public spaces. Park District President Silly Jones vehemently criticized these fines, accusing Henyard of using her power to interfere with the work of an independent agency and punish officials who did not align with her political agenda. But the retaliation didn't end there. Henyard's administration also blocked over $500,000 in grants intended for park improvements in Dalton, a decision that left many residents and local leaders frustrated. The grants could have funded vital upgrades to public recreational spaces, creating safer and more inviting environments for children and families. Instead, Henyard's decision to withhold the funds was seen as a punitive measure against those who dared to oppose her leadership, further reinforcing the perception that she was more interested in consolidating her power than in serving the community's needs. Her approach to governance became increasingly authoritarian, with Henyard disregarding transparency, accountability, and the needs of the public. Her refusal to engage with community leaders or address growing financial challenges in Dalton alienated those who had once supported her. The more Henyard tried to centralize power, the more Dalton seemed to descend into chaos. As political tensions in the town increased, Henyard's grip on power began to slip. Her actions, coupled with growing allegations of mismanagement, sparked widespread dissatisfaction with her leadership. The tipping point came when Henyard was removed from the Democratic ballot for Thornton Township supervisor. This shocking move was seen as a direct response to the mounting allegations surrounding her administration. The Democratic Party, which had once embraced Henyard as a rising star, had now abandoned her, signaling a dramatic shift in her political fortunes. Her removal from the ballot marked the end of her political trajectory as a viable candidate, and the loss symbolized the erosion of her power and legitimacy. Henyard's ouster was a clear sign that her political empire was crumbling, and the very party that had supported her was now turning against her. In response to this political defeat, Henyard refused to take responsibility for her actions. Instead of addressing the allegations of misconduct and mismanagement, she portrayed herself as the victim of a political conspiracy. Henyard's defiant stance and refusal to acknowledge her mistakes only fueled public skepticism about her leadership. Rather than attempting to rebuild trust or engage in self-reflection, she chose to double down on her controversial tactics, attempting to shift the blame to others and positioning herself as the target of a political witch hunt. Henyard's defiance, however, did not go unnoticed. The community's growing frustration with her leadership reached a boiling point. Residents who had once supported Henyard now saw her as a symbol of political failure, a cautionary tale of how unchecked power can corrupt even the most promising leaders. As the crisis deepened, Henyard's political future became increasingly uncertain. Allegations of financial mismanagement and corruption continued to mount, attracting the attention of federal investigators, who reportedly began reviewing Henyard's administration's financial records. Henyard's reaction to these mounting legal and political challenges was one of defiance. She continued to project an image of confidence, claiming that she would win re-election by a landslide, drawing comparisons to former President Donald Trump. However, her refusal to address the growing legal issues surrounding her leadership only served to deepen the perception that she was increasingly disconnected from the concerns of Dalton's residents. Many began to question whether Henyard's priorities lay in serving the public or maintaining her grip on power. As the legal battles unfolded, Henyard's handling of public safety in Dalton became another point of contention. The Dalton Police Department, which had been facing staffing issues and legal disputes, experienced further instability following the firing of Police Chief Ronnie Burr. With crime rates rising and a lack of leadership in the police department, residents grew increasingly concerned about their safety. Henyard's failure to provide clear leadership in this area added to the growing sense of unease among Dalton's residents. The crisis in Dalton was further exacerbated by Henyard's conflicts with the town's trustees. Several trustees, including Chris Gonzalez, began boycotting meetings in protest of Henyard's growing authoritarianism. In response, Henyard threatened to cancel the township's insurance coverage, a drastic move that could have jeopardized essential municipal services. Her willingness to put the town's services at risk in order to retain control further underscored her reckless approach to governance and her disregard for the well-being of Dalton's residents. Despite growing opposition and mounting legal pressure, Henyard's supporters remained steadfast in their belief that she was the victim of a political attack. Illinois State Senator Napoleon Harris, who had once been a vocal supporter of Henyard, described her as a fighter who would not back down. However, Harris's defense of Henyard increasingly became at odds with the reality in Dalton, where the majority of residents were losing confidence in her leadership. As the political divide within the community deepened, Henyard's ability to regain the trust of Dalton's residents appeared increasingly unlikely. The political drama surrounding Henyard reached its peak during the Democratic caucus in Thornton Township, where the local Democratic Party selected its candidates for the upcoming election. Henyard, eager to secure her re-election bid, faced a significant setback when it was revealed that her list of candidates was incomplete. She had failed to include a certified assessor, a key requirement for a legitimate nomination. This oversight left Henyard vulnerable to a well-organized political challenge. P. Harris, a powerful Democratic committeeman, capitalized on Henyard's mistake and quickly rallied support for a slate of candidates to oppose her. In the end, Henyard's loss at the caucus marked a humiliating defeat, further exposing the weaknesses in her leadership and political strategy. Henyard's response to her caucus defeat was one of anger and frustration. She stormed out of the caucus, accusing Harris and his supporters of manipulating the process to undermine her re-election efforts. Her outburst, coupled with allegations of caucus manipulation, only added fuel to the fire of political infighting and deepened the divide within the local Democratic Party. As the investigations into Henyard's administration continued to unfold, federal authorities began reviewing her financial dealings, including allegations of misuse of public funds. These investigations, coupled with the growing public backlash against Henyard's leadership, only intensified the political crisis in Dalton and Thornton Township, while Henyard's supporters continued to rally behind her, claiming she was the victim of a political witch hunt. The reality in Dalton painted a very different picture. Residents were increasingly disillusioned by her leadership, and many began to question whether Henyard's actions were in the best interest of the community. The fate of Dalton and Thornton Township now rests in the balance. As legal challenges, political drama, and ongoing investigations continue to unfold, the future of Henyard's political career hangs in the balance. The once promising leadership of Henyard has become a cautionary tale of political dysfunction, corruption, and mismanagement. The community of Dalton, once hopeful for the change Henyard promised, now finds itself torn apart by scandal and distrust. As the crisis deepens, it remains unclear whether Henyard will be able to survive the political storm she has created, or if the mounting pressure will finally force her out of office. For Dalton and Thornton Township, the next few months will be critical in determining whether they can recover from the damage caused by Henyard's leadership, or if the political instability she has fostered will continue to unravel the fabric of local governance. The stakes are high, and the outcome remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that Henyard's once promising political career is now a symbol of political failure, and her legacy will likely be one of controversy, corruption, and lost opportunities.